hope you can hear me.
Hello, sir. Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, okay. A couple of more minutes, that's it. So, as usual, let me start with if somebody has any question or comment. If not, let's continue with our about Riemann integral. So, step back a little and recall our last class. We had done this theorem that for a bounded function f is integrable if and only if for every epsilon we have a partition such that the upper integral or the upper approximation for that partition and the lower approximation for that partition are differ by less than epsilon. We had also noted that if it works for one partition P, if you take any partition which is contained in P, that means you add more points to P, refinement of P, you take any Q which is a refinement of P, then the upper and lower between Q will also remain less than equal to epsilon, because the uppers only increase as you make refinements and the lowers, sorry, uppers only decrease and lowers only increase. So, so difference between upper and lower over upper and lower over P is less than equal to epsilon, and therefore the difference between upper and lower between Q will also be less than equal to epsilon. Now, equation 2 which I have written, I had not noted in the last class, but it's a very important one. Not only that, so we have found a partition such that the upper and lower approximations are differ by less than epsilon, and then the integral, which now exists as we have stated that it is Riemann integrable. So the integral a to b fx dx will exist, and that is between the upper and long. Upper approximation is bigger than equal to f, which in turn is greater than equal to the lower approximation. this equation 2 follows from what I have written by hand below, because every refinement upper over P is less than greater than equal to upper over Q. So that means when you take infimum and take UABF, therefore the difference between the upper and lower approximations themselves is less than equal to epsilon. This holds for every epsilon, so the upper and lower are equal and is equal to the Riemann integral. That's what they have shown. So in particular, so both these are equal and are equal to Riemann integral. Therefore, we get that UABFP is greater than equal to the integral, which in turn is greater than equal to LF. So this is the important property, and indeed, it was this property which gave us the result, which I have now shown here. If F is continuous, then F is Riemann integral. The proof was straightforward because we just used continuity on a closed bounded interval, says it is uniformly continuous. And then use uniform continuity and lower and upper, we could show that by choosing the uniform approximation to be small enough, we can get the partition. So,
Hello, sir. Sir, being continuous in a closed bounded interval, doesn't that imply that the function is bounded in that interval?
yeah.
So then, I mean, if we just show that the, being continuous, it is also bounded, then we can use the previous theorem only to directly conclude that the continuous function is Riemann integrable. Oh, okay. So for in case of bounded, there that partition thing should be there.
How to bring in the partition thing we have to bring in.
Yes.
So that's why in the statement I have just said it is continuous. It implies that it is bounded. So that's all. So the now apart from proving that it is Riemann integrable, this observation about the integral lies between the upper and lower on this also tells us the following, allows us the following. We use the continuity to create an approximation for approximated as follows. So now we know that the integral is somewhere in between these two, and the difference is these two differ by less than epsilon. Now, let's make the following observation. That instead of taking upper and lower, this is f is continuous, remember, otherwise this trick will fail. But for continuous, so I have just taken f at tj, upper point in every interval, and done this approximation. Now, what we know is that this will be less than equal to u a b f p and is greater than equal to l. These are upper and lower. So they will be approximate the anything you do with a choosing a point in each interval, pi minus 1 to pi, will lie in between the upper supremum and maximum, and therefore this will be true. And what does it tell us? So that L and U, which in turn differ by less than epsilon, the integral is in this interval, and so is this approximation. So what is the difference between these two?
I guess it should be less than or equal to the difference between the upper and lower partition, which is chosen to be epsilon. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Epsilon, I'm wondering. Only epsilon is, because both these numbers are within these bounds, and these bounds themselves differ by at most epsilon, so therefore it is less than equal to epsilon. So it gives you a quick way of, now how do we get hold of these TJs?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can you please explain once more the inequality? I mean, the integral minus the summation less than epsilon.
Yeah. So it's like this. If you have, let's say, less than equal to x less than equal to v, and u less than equal to z less than equal to v. Okay. Then z and x themselves can differ by at most the difference between v and u.
Oh, yes, yes, I get it now. Okay, sir.
That is all we are using. So, and this TJ was just my choice. The same thing will be true if instead of TJ, we put TJ minus 1. To take it the lower end point, the same approximation holds. So, depending on how the computation can be done and simplified, we can take it at upper end point, we can take it at the lower end point, we can take it as the midpoint, and we can also take the average between f of TJ and f of TJ minus 1. So, now epsilon get delta such that uniform continuity minus fp less measure will take epsilon divided by b minus a. Then we get that if you have any partition, any interval which is distance is less than delta, then any 2 points there differ by less than this quantity. So in particular, if for any such interval we take maxima and minima, the difference between maxima and minima will be also less than equal to epsilon by 2. Now what you do is you take tj to be a plus j delta by 2 and m is equal to b. So how much m we will need? M to be equal to b minus a m to be 2 times b minus a by delta, then when you put j equal to m, you will get delta by delta 2. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we first get a delta from uniform continuity, and by this trick, we construct m many numbers here. And now we have that the distance between maxima and minima will be less than equal to epsilon by b by 2. Epsilon by b minus a. Now you can multiply and take the sum, and you will get that upper and lower bound. For this partition P, the distance is the difference between upper and lower is less than equal to epsilon. Now we have got now a scheme of computation that we can compute the partition. Not only that there exists a partition, we have now constructed a partition. And now, from what we have shown, summation tj minus 1, all of them are equal to the same quantity, delta by 2. So we can even simplify that, but it doesn't matter. But the other thing I mentioned was that what we said with tj will also be true with
Hello, sir.
yeah.
Sir, when we are varying the TJs, I mean, we are keeping the distance between TJ and TJ minus 1 fixed, but for all these pairs, I mean, whenever TJ and TJ minus 1 differ by that particular delta, then the FU minus FB will differ by epsilon by B minus A. That is only because the continuity is in closed bounded interval, right? Okay.
I have got now 4 quantities. Each of them approximates the integral. Each of them approximates the integral a to b. And difference is at most epsilon. Or error. Once we say approximates, then the difference between the true quantity and the estimated quantity or approximately computed quantity is called error. So not only have a theorem that a continuous function is Riemann integrable, we have got hold of a quick way or formula or approximation method or computation method to get hold of the integral. And there are problems in which somewhere the first one is useful, somewhere the second is useful, somewhere the third is useful, and somewhere the fourth is useful. That depends on the problem or the function f, which one may give you a quick answer. So, of course, we didn't have to choose equal TJs, TJ minus 1. We could have chosen any choices. This was just one choice. If you see that by making some other choice, things may be simpler, you might do that as well.
Sir, can you scroll up a little bit? Okay, sir. Thank you.
So, computation things, other tricks which are tried are, you don't want to have these TJs to be, a number which doesn't have terminating binary expansion. So you might choose suitable delta so that at least all but the last one are equal and only the last one can be approximately smaller. So various tricks are there, depend on the problem. Or you might treat the delta. This delta works, so you can take any smaller delta that will also work. So you can take a smaller delta so that the numbers you get are all binary numbers.
Sir, is m a natural number?
Yeah, written. So which case last one already is not a m minus 1 and tm is not a same as the earlier ones. But we can choose a smaller delta than the given one to make such that the ratio is integer.
Okay.
Now the way I have written, all are equal except the last one. Intervals. So we got hold of continuous function
there is some kind of background noise in your mic.
Is it reduced or no?
It's kind of the same now.
Kind of the same. Okay.
Now it's gone.
Yeah. So this is somewhat not exactly weird, but funny or interesting that the noise that I hear in my ear is the same, but what the computer hears and sends it to you is different. So, okay. All right. So, and there can be other ways of writing such proofs, but this I find a very useful way of writing the proofs. That is, for Riemann integrability, you get hold of a partition which approximates it within epsilon. The lower and upper themselves differ by less than epsilon, and therefore each of these two is within epsilon of the integral. Okay. Now, so continuous function on closed bounded interval is Riemann integral. Now, sentence I was trying to write, and when I got a call, so I stopped and I did not. So, sorry. No, all right. So here is another interesting observation, that you have a Riemann integrable function. You take one point in the interval. Maybe we talked about it, but anyway, no harm even if I am repeating. And define G equal to F for all points other. So Gx equal to Fx for all x other than C, and at C it is 0. So F and G agree everywhere except at one point. And that one point, G has some other value. In this case, I have called it 0, but that 0 could be any other number too. Okay. Then G is also Riemann integrable, and integral of F is same as integral of G. So in other words, changing the function at one point does not change the value of the integral. Any idea how one would prove this?
Sir, we can choose a partition in such a way that the C, I mean the point at which it differs, that is not an end point.
Okay. But how will that help?
So then the functional values are all same. I mean, so
no. Firstly, you are not given a continuous function. Remember, you are only given an integrable function. So we are not using those approximations using upper or lower or endpoints. All right.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, can we use that integral of from a to b f of x is equal to integral from a to c plus integral from c to b?
But even there, the c is still an endpoint in both these integrals. Right? So in other words, if in this problem you are given c to be equal to b, right? So Immediately, even that doesn't come through.
Sir, I think we did discuss this last time, and I think what we did was we chose a partition of A to B
Yeah.
such that the partition around C, the partition which contains the part which contains C, is very small, and essentially by doing that we minimize the contribution of C sort of to the integral, and so in that way we showed that these two like are eventually the same. But to say it more formally, I'll need to think for some more time.
Yeah. So for formally, what we have to do is, okay, what you said exactly, I had mentioned this, but I had not formalized it. Yes. So what we do is first, given epsilon, get P such that okay. Now in given epsilon positive and but right now we don't have any way of choosing P. We have just there exists a P. But if the point C is not in the create a new partition so that the point C is there. And now we can observe that since Q is a refinement, the since Q is a refinement, we still are the upper and lower bounds are still of the same character type, that their difference is at most epsilon, etc. And the integral is in between the two. Now what? Now we add more points. So take the points in Q, enumerate them in the increasing order T0, T1, Tm, and let alpha be this maximum of this. Okay, and now what we do, you add the following points. C minus alpha by n, alpha by 2n, and C plus alpha by 2n. Let's call it Qn. So now what we have done, Qn is a further refinement of Q, in other words, refinement of P, and therefore the inequality, this inequality and this estimate, both of them are true for Qn replacing P. Okay, and now we can see that LABFQn and LABGQn, their differences at most we can take out. There are only two intervals in between which include this point C. All other intervals do not include the point C, and all their estimates are the same. And we can then get that
excuse me, sir.
yeah.
Why are we taking alpha to be the maximum? I mean, shouldn't we take the minimum or like something? We want the small interval. I mean, yeah.
Uh, yeah, minimum. Thanks. Yeah. Various choices are there. We can take the one just below C and one above C and take the smaller of the two, because other points don't really count here. Everything is action is around C. So we want to add points close to each other near C, which are already not there, and then they are the gap is increasing, reducing. Okay.
So I guess on a similar line, I'm not understanding why we need alpha to be this in particular. As in, why can't it just be one? I'm not understanding what the significance of this minimum term is.
It need not be this. It could be the point, just the gap between C and the previous one and the C and the next one. We need not even add C. We could have started with P itself and taken the point closest to P on the left side and closest to P, C on the left side and closest to C on the right side, and difference between the two.
Okay. So,
Okay.
but suppose we just started with alpha equal to 1. Eventually, like 1 by n is going to get very small anyway. So
Even then, we can say that not for every n, but for large n, this will be the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sir,
Okay,
we
sir.
just need to see that the C plus 1 by n, those are within the interval a comma b.
Yeah, but we need n large enough so that these are the C minus alpha 2 to n to C plus alpha 2, and these are endpoints of two successive intervals, or even one
Okay.
interval. There are no intervals in between. That is what we need to check.
Okay, sir. Got it, sir. Thank you.
So, okay, let me do one thing. Let me rewrite what I have written now in a slightly different way. Not that this is wrong, but okay. So, so we take the two within this partition. We alpha 1 is the largest and alpha 2 is the smallest, uh, uh, below C and above C. Okay, and now we can keep adding points in between alpha 1 and alpha 2. Yeah, the writing will get more complicated because we have to again take the case where C is one of these or C is not one of these. So let me summarize it.
Sir,
Yeah,
when we defined Riemann integral, the partition we defined a partition over a closed boundary interval, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, how can we define the Riemann integral for G?
Why?
Because OG of C is equal to, oh, it is defined. Okay,
Have defined.
OG is defined.
Fine. Oh, if you don't define G at C, then you can't take Riemann integral. Yes.
Okay, sir. Yes.
That is why I added, initially I had added C because then I don't have to take cases that C is there, C is not there.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So once again, I take Q to be P union C. So added point C in Q and then let alpha 1 is equal to max U belonging to Q U less than C, alpha 2 equal to minimum U belonging to Q, U bigger than C. Now I will call that alpha 1. And now take alpha n to be equal to C minus now alpha n and beta n will do our job.
Sir, what have you written that 1 by n? The C minus.
So C minus alpha 0, that gap,
Sir, in the denominator.
n plus 1.
Oh, okay.
I mean, otherwise I could take 1 by n, but then C alpha 1 will be equal to alpha 0. So just to avoid that. So now alphas are strictly increasing and betas are strictly decreasing. We have added alpha and beta n to Qn. And now, except for these two, for Qn, except for alpha n to C and C to alpha Q beta n, these are the only two intervals for which this supremum infimum will differ between F and G. All other things they don't differ. And in these two intervals, the lengths are small. So 1 by n is there in the denominator.
Sir, Qn should be Qn minus 1 union that thing, right?
Well, you don't have to have increasing intervals.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This will make it easier to write down the thing. If you keep adding more and more points, it gets more complicated to write down. Okay. So, so we had FG and then we had Qn equal to Q union alpha n beta n. Okay. Now, in these two, the difference between lower end points is only 2 points. So this will be the term, this times the distance, which is alpha 0 1 by n plus 1. So this is equal to this difference. So the two terms which are different. So minimum over f x belonging to so these are the two terms which survive, and then here the same terms minus, I will write here, same term with g in place of f. Okay. The main point is, whatever be the differences, that this difference will always be less than equal to alpha 0 by n plus 1 times some constant c. Let me put constant k.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Why are both terms multiplied by alpha not by n plus 1?
Oh. Okay.
Second one.
Alpha not by n plus 1, and second one will be beta not by n plus 1. Yes.
Sir, we can take the difference of f and g and prove that the integral is 0, right?
Sorry?
Will that work? Sir, if we prove that the integral of f minus g is 0.
Yeah, but we have to show that to begin with, the g is integrable. This will show that the integral, the difference is 0. Yes.
Okay, sir.
Sir,
Yeah.
Since f is integrable, since f is integrable for every epsilon, we have some partition such that LABF QN LABF P minus UABF P mod is less than epsilon. So for that epsilon, we take that partition P and union that point C.
Okay.
And then the same should work for G. So this implies that G is integrable and essentially.
No. Because the maximum and minimum of f and g over the partition is not the same, because the point C, they are different.
but we are including the point C in the partition. So aren't we like only supposed to consider the open intervals like within the
No,
partition?
no.
We
In
should
the
take the
definition
closed.
of integral, the upper and lower bounds, they are on the closed interval from the lower and upper.
Oh,
in the
okay,
interval.
even within those partitions.
Yeah, in each partition also we have to take the
Okay, sir. That is the issue.
maybe some books do it with the open and maybe try to argue that they are the equal, etc., etc. So somewhere you have to do the work. So as
Hello, sir.
huh?
Sir, if we explicitly consider a function, I mean, say hx, which is equal to fx minus gx, which is 0 everywhere except a single point, and then show that the integral of that is actually 0, then would that work?
Yes. That will be a shorter way of doing it. Yes.
Okay.
Take h to be that value, the difference, then it is 0 everywhere except at one point. And now you separately prove that if you have a function which is 0 everywhere except at one point, then it's integrable and its integral is 0.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So that will be a shorter way of writing this proof. You are right. Yeah. So others got what his observation was? If any confusion, I can explain it again, but perhaps not needed. And we need not go through this complicated proof that I was writing. Yeah.
Now, so what you've written in blue,
Uh-huh.
that is the difference between like LABFQN minus LABGQN. Is that?
They're not just in blue. The blue minus after we subtract the same quantities for G in place of N. So only then that is the difference.
Oh yeah, that was my question. Yes.
This whole thing is the difference.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Because all other terms are equal, so we have taken them out, and this is the difference. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the simpler proof as outlined is and we can take a partition P to be so n large enough so that this C minus 1 by n and C plus 1 by n are within AB. And then we can get that U A B F H P N. All others are 0 and only this. So upper and because we have to take cases where H is positive, H is negative. So we can get that the upper and lower bounds are this, and they differ by at most whatever number, and therefore they go to 0. The difference goes to 0. So integrate, therefore, hx dx is 0. H is Riemann integrable and the integral is 0. And therefore, integral f is also equal to integral g. Okay. So, and what we did with 1 point, we can change it to finitely many points. And let me share with you that when I was in school, I used to think that this way of showing that if it can be done for 1, we can do for 2 by doing the same thing once more. And that is induction, right? So it works for n, it works for n plus 1. And I had made the mistake of saying that, yeah, we have proved it, that it works for all integers or at least all countable integers. It only proves for finitely many. As this example, we know this will not be true for countably many. Rationals are countable, and if you take a function h, which is 0 at rationals and 1 at irrationals, or other way, they are not, that function is not Riemann integrable. So we can change at 1 point, it remains Riemann integrable. You change finitely many points, it remains Riemann integrable. If you change at countably many points, it may or may not be Riemann integrable. Okay. Can you, somebody quickly think of an example where even by changing it at countably many points, the function remains integrable?
1 by x from 1 to infinity. If I remove the points 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, 1 to infinity, we are not talking infinite interval. So let's take 0, 1. You are right, but let's not bring in infinite integration at the moment. Okay, so our function is, we are going to define a function only on the unit interval 0, 1. So we change at points 1 over n for every n.
Sir, by induction, we can prove, I mean, we can extend this for any finite number of points.
Yes.
But how do we go about the countable number of points?
You can't go back. That is what I'm saying, that you can't go over countable many points.
Oh, okay. Okay, sir.
By induction. Okay. And all, if you change something to at all rationals, that fails. We know that. So therefore, we know that this trick is not going to go up to countably many. Okay. However, if I change, if f and g are equal at all, if h is equal to 1 at the point when x is equal to 1 over n and is 0 otherwise, we can directly prove that it is Riemann integrable. So let's take hx is equal to 1 at the points 1 over n where n is a positive integer. Okay, and 0 otherwise. Claim so what you do is you take a small interval around 0 that will take most of the points, And only finitely many points will stay outside there. So, this quantity for C positive, once C is positive, we know that only finitely many points between C and 1 they are differing. So this we know is equal to 0. Right? And what is the upper bound? Lower bounds are 0. Upper bound on 0 to C is equal to C times 1. Constant C is the length and 1. So any intervals you take here, all of them, the upper bounds will be with 1 maybe. And so this is the U on this interval is less than equal to C times 1, and C can be small. So,
Sir, could you explain this once again?
okay.
I could not understand.
Okay, right. Let's do one thing. Let me carefully argue that, but the idea is, I'll write the proof later, but the idea is the following, that if you take any fixed C positive, okay, so let's take C to be 1 over 10 power 6, okay. Then what happens? In the, from 1, yeah. So this integral about 10 powers, there are only finitely many points between 1 over 10 power 6 to 1. Okay. So integral from C to 1 fx dx is 0. That f is integrable and it is 0. We know. Now, slightly differently. Given epsilon, okay, let's take C to be equal to epsilon by 2. And we know that this integral from C to 1 fx dx is defined and is 0. So, so get a partition P of C to 1 such that upper bound C1 F or H or whatever is my the lower bounds are anyway 0 everywhere. Upper bound is less than equal to epsilon by 2. Now, just add the point 0. What would happen? When you take the upper bound, there will be this interval 0 to C and then the rest. Right? So U0, 1, HQ, I claim, is equal to C1 HP plus this interval has length C, maximum is 1, so C times 1, which is epsilon by 2. Lower bound continues to be 0 and upper bound less than equal to epsilon by 2. So we are done. So this is what I was trying to explain, that for any C, from C to 1 it is integrable because there are finitely many points with which it is 0. And the interval 0 to C, the approximation can be made very small because the total length itself is C. So in particular, I just take a singleton point, lower end point. That's it for adding. Then the upper integral there will become 1 times whatever.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So can you please scroll down a bit?
Yeah.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, in this case, if we choose any interval, that contains 0, then it will contain finitely many points will be outside that interval, right?
That's what I have used here. I have explicitly taken. Yes.
So if finite number of points, if this property also finite number of points, the same thing will be true, right?
Yeah, it's a question of how you write down the argument. Essentially, that is what I am writing.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. But you can't start with any interval of which contains 0. That starting is a problem. What if my interval is only 0 to half? Right? Now it is not small. The contribution from that is not small. So the arguments can be 100 ways you can write them. Okay. You can take, to begin with, for any integer m, you can take partitions of the type 0, 1 over m, 2 over m, 3 over m, and last one is 1. 1 over m, 2 over m, and up to m over m, which is 1. Argue for that. So you have to start by writing an explicit partition. That also can be done.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I was thinking of something. Like,
Uh-huh.
if can we extend this system to saying that if it differs in infinitely many points, which has an immediate successor, then will it be Riemann integrable?
No.
Like the rationals doesn't have immediate successor, but the 1 by n has.
Not a question of immediate successor issues. No. Don't bring in things which are external to this system. Okay. So what is your statement? Once again, make it.
Like there is an immediate next number, we can order it.
No. So what is the immediate next number to what? Ordering what?
Any point.
To make the full statement, you are given a function f with the some property.
Like I was saying that in this case, we are taking the set 1 by n.
Don't confuse with this set and this case, etc. Are you are giving a different proof or a different statement?
I was thinking of some extensions.
So extension, you are saying that, okay, are you talking about the set of points at which it is non-zero? You are approximating that.
No, I was saying that for infinitely many points, the function differ at infinitely many points.
Okay, so you have a function f Okay, so let's call that the set of that set as B. They differ at a points in point D, and D is countable. Now what?
Every point in D has an immediate successor.
No, I see immediate successor is a notion which is kind of outside our thing at the moment. Okay. If you mean that there is exactly one point there with such that in between there is no other point in D, is that what you mean by immediate successor?
Yeah. Yes.
Sir,
Yeah.
I think the best we can have is we have a countable sequence, but the limit points of that sequence is finitely many. Then this theorem holds.
Yeah.
Like for this case, the limit point is only 0, but in other cases where the limit point is also finitely many times, for the rational, the limit points forms the R. So for the 0,1 set, so it is not integrable. So that is probably the best add-on.
Yeah.
For remaining integrability.
Yeah. And I guess if every point has a successor, that will mean it has no limit point other than no limit point in that set. And then what it could be, we'll have to worry about that. Okay, because these are all subsets coming from a bounded subset. They will definitely have a limit, but then that limit is outside that set.
If the limit point is outside the set, then the number of points in the sequence intersection that set would be finitely many. So that won't be an issue.
Yeah. So, yeah. See, my endeavor has been that without introducing too many formal notions, we are trying to get to this. Okay. The successor, it's a useful thing. I'm not saying it is not useful, but not relevant in our discussion. So that's why I have not brought that in.
So I think like the successor notion can be even defined for any ordering that need not be the usual ordering.
See, all this, a whole lot of things can be done. Okay.
Yeah. Like,
how much we should cover in one course is a question.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the rational can be defined as a success. The successor of a rational can be defined using that Cantor diagonalization, that thing where we are actually fetching the countability, but that won't be exactly equal to our usual notion of successor. But if we can perform the induction using that successor, like that bijection, then our statement would be true. But that kind of induction would be false, when applied to this case. So that is where
so that is the point
that proof should enforce.
That we can define a successor, but whether it is consistent with what we require. Okay.
Yes.
That is where the point is. So you are right. Every countable set, we can define an ordering in a way that there is a successor. Exactly. Everything has exactly one successor on a countable set. But that in the order for that successor, I think, may not be of use for our proof.
Yes, sir.
Right. So,
and I think the converse is also like this is like if the countable sequence has infinitely many limit points, whether that be countable or infinite, then the number of limit points, if it is infinite, then the function would be not integrable.
Yeah, but let us not. I'm not even making such a statement. Okay, because writing out this precise statement, then you have to write out a precise proof. Okay.
Yes.
So at the moment, we are worried only about when is it Riemann integrable. We are staying away from making a statement about when is a function not Riemann integrable other than examples. Okay. So yeah, because that takes us to the Riemann integrable if and only if. To properly write it down, we need a lot more framework, lot more basics, etc. And that is why we have avoided that. Okay. For those of you who go on to do Lebesgue integration theory, at that point, a statement about this can be made.
Yeah, for Lebesgue, it is nice.
Huh?
Defined also have like the same. Yeah, that is also Lebesgue integrable for the rational and irrational function. It's differently defined. That is also Lebesgue integrable. So yeah, but sorry.
So there exist Lebesgue integrable functions which are not Riemann integrable.
Yeah, just like the one that is what is 0 on the rational and 1 in the irrational.
Yeah. But then there exist functions which are not Lebesgue integrable either. So there are. It's not that it is everything is Lebesgue integrable.
But Lebesgue integrability implies Riemann integrability.
Yeah.
Sorry. Riemann integrability implies Lebesgue integrability.
Yeah. Okay, so time is also up, and perhaps you have already a class, or some of you may leave right away. And those who want to chat a little, I can be there for a little while, but you have a class, I guess, immediately after this. You can leave.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Yes, sir.
Like the countable additivity actually gives a whole lot of result, Lebesgue integrability, which in turn implies a finite intersection, but still, but it forms a Riemann algebra. So those things actually makes it nice. Okay.
Yeah. But there is no end to it. So what I thought is consequence of countable additivity. Many of those things can actually be proven even without finite countable additivity. So
Okay, sir. Thank you.
so all right.